Wyoming Territory, July 1884. The sun hung high, burning down on the cracked earth as Alden O'Connell rode into Dry Creek with dust on his boots and 3 weeks' grit in his beard. He needed supplies: flour, coffee, maybe a new bridle if he could spare the coin, but he had not expected to find her. Not here. Not after all these years. She was standing outside the general store, a sack of cornmeal hugged to her chest like it weighed more than it should. Her dark brown hair was pinned up, but a few strands had come loose in the breeze. She looked older, more tired around the eyes, but it was her. Faith Zeller, the girl who once shared half his bread. Alden reined in his horse, heart pounding too loud for a man who had faced down bandits and blizzards alike. She had been 15 the last time he saw her, shivering in the rain near Fort Laramie, a runaway with a busted shoe and no food. He had been 17, full of trail dust and borrowed confidence. He had given her the last half of his bread and watched her disappear into the wild with a whispered thank you. Now she was here, and she was not alone. A boy clung to her skirt, small, maybe 4, with dark curls and a serious face. A girl, a little older, peeked out from behind her, arms wrapped defensively across her middle. The children looked nothing alike, but both had the same wariness in their eyes, like they had learned too early that the world did not give second chances. Alden dismounted and tied his horse, then walked slow toward them. Faith looked up just as he stepped from the shadow of the saloon. Her eyes widened. "Alden," he nodded once. "Been a long time." She blinked hard, like she was not sure he was real. You look different. Grew into my boots, I guess." She gave a soft, breathless laugh. The sound cracked something in his chest. The boy tugged on her skirt. "Mama, who's that?" Her hand dropped gently to the child's head. "An old friend." Alden did not know what to say to that. He wanted to ask about the children, hers, clearly, but something about the way she stood made him hold his tongue. She was proud even now, maybe especially now. "Thought you weren't the kind to settle," she said. "I am not. Just came in for supplies." She nodded, lifting the sack of cornmeal again. "Then I will let you get to it." He stepped forward without thinking. "Let me carry that for you." She hesitated. Then quietly, she handed it over. They walked side by side down the dusty boardwalk. The girl stayed close to Faith's leg. The boy stared up at Alden like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You got a place here?" Alden asked. "Just outside town. A little cabin. Belonged to a widow who passed last winter. I keep the garden up and help the doctor when he needs it." He nodded. "And the children?" She looked straight ahead. "Not mine by blood. Their mother died in the snow last November. They were left behind in a wagon wreck. I could not leave them." Alden looked down at the boy, who had picked up a stick and was dragging it through the dust. The girl watched him carefully, never more than a few steps away from Faith. "They got names?" "Zeke and Zora." He nodded again. "Good names." Faith stopped at the edge of the road, near a narrow wagon trail leading east. "This is where I turn off." Alden shifted the sack to his left arm. "I will walk you the rest." "You do not have to." "I want to." She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his voice made her stop. They walked in silence for a while. The cabin sat in a grove of cottonwoods, small and worn but neat. A line of laundry fluttered in the breeze. A box of carrots sat on the porch, half peeled. "You done well," Alden said quietly. "It is not much. It is enough." Faith opened the door as Zora slipped inside. Zeke hovered near the step, eyeing Alden with a mix of caution and interest. "You hungry, Zeke?" Alden asked gently. Zeke nodded. Faith hesitated, then stepped aside. "You can stay for supper." Alden followed her in. The cabin smelled like soap and onions, and the floor was swept clean. Zora was already setting plates, her movements careful and practiced. Zeke climbed onto a stool and waited. They ate in quiet. Alden helped Zora reach the salt. Zeke smiled once when Alden made a face behind Faith's back with a carrot stick. When the children were asleep, Zora curled on a cot near the fire. Zeke, tucked beside her, Faith stepped out onto the porch. Alden followed her. The night was warm. Crickets buzzed in the grass. A lantern flickered behind them. "I did not think I would ever see you again," she said. "I looked for you," he admitted. "That night after I gave you the bread. I waited, but you never came back. I had to keep moving. I was scared." Alden nodded. "I was too." She turned to look at him, her face soft in the moonlight. "Why did you give it to me?" "The bread." He shrugged. "You looked hungrier than I was." Faith smiled, small and tired. "That night saved me. I am glad." They stood there, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally, she whispered, "You are still the same, just steadier now. And you are stronger than I remembered." She looked away, blinking fast. "I have had to be." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just full. "I should get going," Alden said, not moving. Faith nodded. "Of course." But she did not open the door, and he did not step down. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with rough fingers. She leaned into it before she could stop herself. "Faith," he said. She looked up at him. "I do not want to ride away this time." Her breath caught. "Then do not." Alden stepped forward, slow but sure, and kissed her. It was soft, careful. But she kissed him back with everything she had held in for years. When they pulled apart, her eyes were wet. "I want to stay," he said. "Then stay." And just like that, for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. By morning, the sky ripened to a soft gold behind the cottonwoods. Alden stepped out early, boots muffled on the dew-damp earth. Smoke curled from the chimney. A rooster crowed somewhere on the slope beyond. He paused beside the well, drawing up a bucket and washing his hands and face in silence, letting the chill settle into his skin. Inside, Faith stirred oatmeal on the stove with sleeves rolled past her elbows. Her hair was still pinned, but less neat than the night before. Zora sat on a low stool, peeling apples with slow, deliberate turns of the knife. Zeke sat cross-legged beside a crate of firewood, stacking split logs by size. Alden entered quietly, nodding once at each of them. "You sleep all right?" Faith asked without turning. "Well enough." She passed him a tin cup of coffee, dark and hot. He took it with a quiet thanks. They stood shoulder to shoulder for a breath while the oats thickened. "I've got a few tools in my saddlebag," he said finally. "Could patch your fence. South corner's sagging." "I know," she said, brushing a curl off her cheek. "I haven't had the time." "I've got it." Faith gave a sideways glance, unreadable. "You planning to stay more than a day, then?" Alden met her eyes. "If you'll have me." Zora looked up from her apples, eyes flicking between them. Faith didn't answer right away. She stirred the pot again, then set the spoon down gently. "You know how hard things are out here." "I do. I can't afford to let someone stay just because I remember them kind. I'm not here out of memory." She held his gaze a moment longer, then turned to the cupboard and took down bowls. "Then fix the fence." Zeke trailed after Alden when he went out, hands in his pockets, boots too big and scuffed. The boy didn't speak, just watched as Alden lowered his saddlebag and sifted through the tools. Alden handed him a small hammer. "You ever drive a nail?" Zeke shook his head. "Want to learn?" A pause, then a quick nod. They worked through the morning, Alden showing him how to line the board straight, how to steady his hand. Zeke was quiet, but careful. When the last board was in place, the boy looked up, squinting against the sun. You gonna marry her? Alden paused with one hand on the top rail. That's something you want? Zeke shrugged. She don't laugh much. But she did when you came. Alden crouched beside him, voice low. I won't do nothing she doesn't want. You understand? Zeke nodded, solemn. Faith had stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron. She didn't call out, just stood watching. Zora peeked from behind the doorframe, her arms crossed tight. Later, after supper, they sat outside again. The moon had risen thin and pale, like brushed silver. Faith leaned against the post, arms folded. Zeke doesn't talk much to strangers. I noticed. He's not easy to win. I'm not in a hurry. She looked down at her hands. The woman who birthed them, she'd been trying to get west to Oregon. Took a shortcut no one should have trusted. Her man died a week out of Cheyenne. She kept going anyway. Alden waited. When I found them, Zora had a fever. Zeke wasn't speaking at all. Just sat beside her with a stick in his hand like it was the only thing left he could hold on to. And you took them in. Faith's voice was quiet. I didn't know what else to do. They're lucky you didn't. She didn't answer, just watched the wind stir the grass. I was thinking, Alden said after a long silence. If you're planting fall crops, I could help till the field. I've got good hands for that. She tilted her head, considering. And I could build a smokehouse. You've got plenty of game nearby. You really planning to stay? I came for supplies, he said. But I reckon I found something else worth more. Faith's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Don't make promises you can't keep. I won't. The door creaked behind them. Zora stepped out, a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at Faith, then at Alden. Can I sit with you? Faith opened her arm. Come on. Zora leaned into her, small and warm. Alden looked out at the trees beyond the fence line, already thinking about where the smokehouse might fit best. Faith's voice was soft, close to his shoulder. If you're staying, you'll need more than a bedroll. I'll sleep in the barn for now. She nodded. And when the time's right, he added, maybe I'll ask for more. Faith's fingers brushed Zora's hair, but her eyes were steady on his. When the time's right, she said. And Alden knew, down to his bones, that he wasn't going anywhere. By late August, the wind turned cooler, and the cottonwoods began to yellow along the edges. Alden stood knee-deep in the creek with trouser legs rolled and boots on the bank, stacking stones into a low dam to slow the runoff from the hills. The water ran clearer than it had a week ago, thanks to the trench he and Zora had dug, winding from the spring to the garden with a gentle slope. She had a knack for angles and quiet patience he only showed her once, and she got the rest. Faith sat on the porch step with a needle in hand, patching the shoulder of Alden's shirt where the fabric had worn thin. Zeke crouched beside her, balancing a flat stone on another. Every so often he'd glance toward the creek, then back to his tower. Fence held up after the storm last night, Faith said, not looking up from her stitching. Alden rinsed his hands in the cold water, then stood, wiping them dry on his trousers. I noticed. South corner didn't budge. Zeke pressed a third stone on top of the others, tongue between his teeth. You ever build a chimney flue? Faith asked. Once in Kansas. Wasn't pretty, but it kept the smoke out. She nodded. There's a draft in the back room. I can feel it down my spine when I sleep. I'll see to it before frost. Zeke's tower toppled in a soft clatter. He didn't frown, just started over. Faith set the finished shirt beside her. There's a man been asking after you in town. Alden stepped onto the porch, brow low. What kind of man? Railroad. Said he was looking for a rider who used to work the Platte line. Wore a brown coat, silver watch at his belt. He leaned against the post. That'd be Leland. He tried to buy me on for a freight run west 2 months back. Offered coin, said it'd be quick. You thinking of taking it? Alden's gaze rolled toward the tree line. No, Faith folded the shirt and set it on her lap. Because of us? Because I've had enough of hauling other men's cargo through places I can't stay. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Zeke tugged her sleeve. Miss Faith, can I show him the rabbit? Faith brushed his hair back. Go on. Zeke ran inside and returned with a small bundle wrapped in a flour sack. He opened it carefully, revealing a carved figure made from driftwood, shaped like a crouched jackrabbit with ears upright and eyes burned in with the end of a poker. Alden crouched to meet his eye. You carved that? Zeke nodded. Zora helped with the ears. It's fine work. You make another, we could trade it in town. Zeke looked to Faith, uncertain. She nodded. If you want to. Zeke clutched the rabbit close and slipped inside again. Faith stood, brushing her palms together. He doesn't let many things leave his hands. I won't push him. She picked up the basket of laundry and stepped off the porch. Alden followed her to the line, where she began pinning shirts and petticoats in the breeze. You said you came for supplies, she said. That was July. Feels longer. When do you stop owing the trail? He took a clothespin and helped string up a sheet. Maybe when I found something worth staying for. She didn't speak, but her hands slowed. I was 16 when my father died in the Bighorns, Alden said, voice low. Took me 3 days to carry him down. After the burial, I kept walking. Didn't know what else to do. Faith turned toward him, quiet. Every place I stopped, I thought it was just until the next need came along. A storm, a horse gone lame, a fence broke. Then I'd ride again. And now, I've got a boy carving rabbits on my porch and a girl who knows how to read soil by touch. And I've got you. Faith reached for a towel from the basket but didn't lift it. I've never been someone a man stayed for. You've never had a man worth staying. Wind rustled the sheet between them. She stepped around it, close enough that he could see how the sun caught the fine lines near her eyes. I need someone who'll wake before the frost and split the kindling without being asked. Someone who won't flinch when Zora's dreams wake her screaming. Someone who knows the sound of a storm before it breaks. I already do. Her hands rested at her sides, rough from work and warm from the sun. Then don't ask. Just stay. Alden reached for her hand, slow and certain. I already have. She let him take it. Behind them, Zeke's voice called from the porch, high and eager. Miss Faith. Zora says the beans are dry. Faith didn't pull her hand away. Tell her to bring them in. Zeke's footsteps thudded across the floorboards as he relayed the message. Faith's gaze lingered on Alden's face. We'll need to pickle the rest before the frost. I'll fetch more salt from town. She pressed her forehead lightly to his shoulder. Take the wagon, bring back what we need. You know what to get. He wrapped his arm around her back. Yes, I do. And when he rode into Dry Creek the next morning, the shopkeep asked if he'd found what he came for. Alden nodded once and said, More than I was looking for. The first frost came early that year. It crept in silent before dawn, crusting the low grass with silver and turning the last of the squash vines brittle and black. Alden rose before the sun, pulling on his coat by lantern light, and stepped into the cold with a quiet steadiness he'd come to wear like skin. He found Zora already outside, her breath visible in the pale morning air, gathering the last of the onions into her apron. She glanced at him only once before returning to her task. Your hands'll go stiff, he said. I'm almost done, she replied, her voice still small with sleep, but sure. Alden crouched to help, brushing aside the spent leaves. They worked without speaking, the cold making their movements sharp and quick. When the apron was full, Zora looked up at him. Can you show me how to keep the skins from rotting? He nodded. After breakfast, we'll cure them in the loft dry air, out of the sun. She gave a single nod, her eyes serious. Then she turned and vanished into the cabin, her steps light but certain. Inside, Faith stood by the stove, hair still damp from the basin, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She was spooning boiled oats into bowls, her movements unhurried. Zeke sat at the table, flipping through the pages of an old almanac, lips moving silently as he followed the words with his finger. Alden hung his coat and settled beside the boy. Faith set a bowl in front of him. You'll want to take the wagon into town this week. I was thinking the same, he said. Ground's near hard. If we wait, the road'll ice over. There's a man in town who sells beeswax and lye. I'll need both. I'll find him. Zeke looked up. Can I come? Faith met Alden's eyes. You think he's ready? Alden turned to the boy. You can ride next to me if you help load the crates and keep your coat buttoned. Zeke gave a small, pleased nod and returned to the almanac. Faith sat across from them. Take one of the quilts. The wind's worse past the ridge. I will. Zora entered, apron full, and Faith rose to meet her. Alden watched the way they moved together, efficient, wordless, like parts of a machine long since adjusted to run smooth. Later that morning, Alden hitched the wagon outside the barn while Zeke ran from the porch with a bundle of dried apples tucked in a cloth pouch. Faith stepped out behind him, passing Alden a folded envelope. List is inside. If you can get the red beans, we'll have enough to last past February. He tucked the note into his coat. I'll bring back whatever I can. She hesitated, then reached up and brushed a bit of straw from his shoulder. If you see the doctor, ask about fever root. Zora's cough keeps returning. All right. Zeke climbed up beside him, gripping the edge of the bench. Faith handed up the pouch. Don't let him eat it all before you get there. Zeke grinned, already chewing. As the wagon rolled out toward the ridge trail, Alden glanced back. Faith stood at the fence line, her arms wrapped tight against the cold, watching them go. Dry Creek was quieter than usual. The saloon's porch was empty, and the smithy's forge burned low. Alden pulled the wagon to a stop outside the general store, helped Zeke down, and gave the boy a quiet word about staying close. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the scent of molasses and tobacco. The shopkeeper, a soft-spoken man named Merrill, gave a nod. Winter's coming early, Merrill said. You'll want extra salt. I've got it on the list, Alden replied, setting the envelope on the counter. Zeke wandered toward the corner where wooden toys and scraps of twine were kept. Merrill opened the note and scanned it while Alden gathered what he could: sacks of flour, lye, a tin of lamp oil. When Merrill reached the final item, he paused. You're looking for fever root? My girl's had a cough. Tell her to boil it low. Too long and it turns bitter. I'll let her know. Merrill wrapped the root in wax paper and pressed it into Alden's hand. That woman, Faith? She's the kind that makes a place better just by staying. Alden nodded once. That's why I stayed. Back at the wagon, Zeke had found a coil of leather cord and was turning it in his hands. You want it? Alden asked. Zeke shrugged. Could make a sling. Alden paid for it without another word and handed it over. Zeke tucked it into his coat and climbed up on the bench. The trail home was rougher than it had been last week, ruts frozen shallow, wheels bouncing through stiff earth. At one point, the wagon lurched hard, and Zeke gripped the rail with both hands. You all right? Alden asked. I didn't drop the cord. Alden gave a quiet laugh. Good. They crested the ridge by mid-afternoon. Smoke curled from the chimney ahead. As they neared the cabin, Zora ran out to meet them, apron flapping in the wind. She said nothing, just reached for the bundles as Alden passed them down. Faith stood on the porch, peeling apples again. She looked up as they approached, and her eyes lingered on Alden longer than they needed to. "You found it all?" she asked. "Everything but the beans. Merrill said his next shipment's late. We'll make do." Zeke held out the fever root like a prize. "I carried it the whole way." Faith took it gently. "Good hands." The sun dipped behind the trees, and the chill came creeping in again. Alden unloaded the rest, stacking sacks in the lean to behind the cabin. When he returned, Faith was alone on the porch, arms folded as the last of the light turned the sky violet. "I got something else," he said, pulling a small parcel from his coat. She opened the cloth to find a tin hair comb, dark wood polished smooth. "You didn't need to." "I know." She turned it over in her hand. "It's beautiful. It's useful. You can stop pinning yours with that rusted fork." A smile tugged at her mouth, quiet and real. "You notice everything, don't you? Only what matters." She reached up and brushed hair from her face, fingers lingering at her temple. "Come inside. It's cold." He followed her through the door, where the fire was already burning low and the room smelled of cloves and wood smoke. That night, while Zeke traced letters in the corner and Zora stirred the onion skins drying in the loft, Alden sat beside Faith at the table, patching a crack in the lantern glass with wire. She handed him the pliers without asking. Outside, the wind shifted, curling around the eaves. Inside, everything held. The days shortened fast after the frost. By late September, the wind carried a bite, and the trees beyond the pasture had yellowed to their cores. Most evenings, Alden and Faith worked by lanternlight, preserving what they could from the garden and setting aside supplies for the deeper cold. The last of the onions were strung and hanging by the rafters, and the cellar shelves stood full of jars sealed in wax pear butter, stewed tomatoes, and the salted meat Alden had smoked in the lean-to he'd built behind the barn. One evening, after Zora and Zeke had gone to sleep, Faith stepped outside with a bundle of wool scraps under one arm and a pair of shears in the other. Alden followed her to the porch, where she settled into the rocker and set the scraps in her lap. "I've been saving these since last year," she said. "Some came from the petticoats that woman left behind. Others were from a coat I couldn't mend." Alden leaned against the post, arms crossed, watching her snip the cloth into clean squares. "What are you making?" "A quilt for the back room. Zora's outgrown the one I stitched when she first came." "You want help cutting?" She glanced up. "You know how to match seams?" "No." "Then you can wind yarn." She passed him a skein, and he sat beside her, legs stretched out, fingers clumsy at first but steadying. The quiet between them was easy. The stars above the cottonwoods were cold and sharp. He could hear the scraping of the shears, the wind in the dry grass, the soft creak of the boards beneath their boots. "I've been thinking," Faith said after a while, "about the land." Alden looked sideways at her. "If we cleared the slope below the east fence, we could plant more come spring. Beans, maybe. Or barley, if we can find seed." "It's rocky," he said. "It is. But it holds water longer than the garden plot." He nodded slowly. "We'll need another mule." "I know." She looked down at the cloth in her lap. "I never thought I'd be planning next year with someone. You don't have to do it alone anymore." "I know," she said, quieter. They worked another hour, until the wind got mean and the lantern flickered low. Inside, Faith tucked the scraps into a wooden chest and banked the fire. Alden checked the latch on the front door, then hung his coat by the stove. She turned, hands brushing sawdust from her skirt. "You've been sleeping in the barn near 2 months." He straightened, sensing something deeper in her voice. "I never asked for more than space," she said. "But it's not just mine anymore. Not just me and the children. It's all of us now." Alden took a step closer. Do you want me in the house? I want you beside me when I wake. I want Zeke to stop asking when it's time for you to come inside. Alden reached for her hand, calloused fingers wrapping around hers. Then I'll move my things tonight. She looked up at him, eyes steady. You sure? I've never been more. Behind them, a floorboard creaked. Zora stood in the doorway, wrapped in a quilt, blinking sleep from her eyes. Faith stepped back, but Alden didn't let go. Zora's voice was scratchy. Is it morning? Faith shook her head. Go back to bed, sweetheart. Zora looked at the two of them, then at the fire and nodded. Okay. She padded back down the hall, and her door clicked shut. Faith turned to Alden. She already knew. She's sharp. Too sharp sometimes. They stood there a long while. Then Faith pulled him close, resting her head against his chest. His arms came around her, solid and warm, and neither spoke. The next morning, Alden's boots thudded on the floor beside hers. Zeke ran into the kitchen and stopped short, blinking at the sight of them both by the stove. Faith set down the coffee pot and crouched beside him. You all right? Zeke nodded, then looked at Alden. You staying? Alden crouched too, arms on his knees. If it's all right with you. Zeke gave a small smile and reached for the comb Alden had carved him from a scrap of pine last week. Okay. Zora joined them soon after, and they all sat down together, the four of them fitting into the morning like it had always been that way. Winter settled over the valley with quiet certainty. Snow came in slow flurries, never sudden, just enough to soften the edges of the world. They kept the cabin warm with alder and pine, and the smokehouse full. Faith taught Alden to stitch the quilt's edge, and he taught Zora how to set a snare without scaring off the rabbit. Zeke took to sleeping with his carved animals lined in a row by his bed. One night in late January, Alden stood beside the hearth, hands folded behind his back as Faith finished reading aloud from the worn book Zora had chosen. The fire crackled low, and the room was hushed. When the children were asleep, Faith stayed by the fire, gaze on the embers. Alden came to sit beside her. I've been thinking, he said. She glanced at him, expectant. There's a man in Dry Creek who does work with iron, has a good hand with fine tools. I was going to ask if he could fashion a ring. Faith didn't move for a moment. Then she reached for his hand. You don't need a ring to be mine. I want one all the same. She turned her palm into his. Then I'll wear it. The wedding was quiet. Just the four of them and the doctor who'd known Faith since the day she arrived in Dry Creek. They stood beneath the bare cottonwoods, snow packed firm under their boots, and spoke their vows clear and slow. Zora held Faith's hand before she passed it to Alden. Zeke stood beside him, serious as a man grown. Faith wore a blue ribbon in her hair. Alden wore his best shirt. They kissed once, and it was enough to warm the air between them. After, they walked back to the cabin, where venison stew simmered and the windows glowed gold in the dusk. They lived long and well. The land gave them barley and late peas the following spring. The slope was cleared by summer's end. A new mule helped with the plow, and Faith's quilt stretched across the bed she and Alden shared every night. Zeke's figures filled a shelf by the hearth. Zora learned to read maps and said she might teach one day. No one rode away. No one was left behind. And every morning, Alden woke beside the woman who had once vanished into the rain and now stood firm beside him, rooted as deep as the cottonwoods that watched over them all.